The metal doors of the interrogation room slid open with a soft hiss. Admiral Jake Morrison stepped inside, his boots clicking against the cold floor. Behind him walked Lisa Carter, a young woman with sharp eyes who carried a datapad in her hands. The room was small and gray, with only a metal table and 2 chairs on each side. Across from them sat something that looked like it came from nightmares. The alien was 8 feet tall, even while sitting down. His skin was dark green and covered in what looked like natural armor. 4 powerful arms hung at his sides, each ending in clawed hands that could crush a human skull. His head was shaped like an insect, with large black eyes and sharp teeth that clicked together when he breathed. This was Commander Zexthara of the Krathari Empire. His people had been winning wars across the galaxy for over 200 years. They were known as the greatest warriors in space. Until they met humans. Morrison pulled out his chair and sat down slowly. He had fought aliens before, but never one this big. Carter sat beside him and placed her datapad on the table. The alien watched them both with those black eyes that showed nothing. The ship they were on was called the Sovereign's Pride. It belonged to the Galactic Coalition, a group of alien races that had joined together to fight wars. The ship was huge, bigger than any human city. Right now it was floating in space near a small moon where a big battle had just ended. Morrison looked at the chains around the alien's 4 arms. They were made of the strongest metal humans could make. Even so, he wondered if they would hold, if the creature really wanted to break free. "Commander Zexthara," Morrison said in a calm voice, "I am Admiral Jake Morrison of the Terran Defense Force. This is Lisa Carter, our tactical analyst." The alien's head turned slightly. When he spoke, his voice was deep and rough like rocks grinding together. "I know who you are, human. Your reputation spreads fear even among the Coalition." Carter looked up from her datapad. "Fear? We're the smallest military force in this part of space." Zexthara made a sound that might have been laughter. His sharp teeth clicked together. "Small in numbers, yes. But you fight like rabid animals. No, worse than animals. Animals know when they are beaten." Morrison leaned forward in his chair. "That's what we want to talk about. In the last 6 months, 3 major coalition fleets have retreated when they met human forces. Your people had more ships, better weapons, and more soldiers. Why did they run?" The alien warrior stared at Morrison for a long moment. "You think this is about numbers and weapons, isn't it?" Carter asked. "Every war in galactic history has been won by the side with more ships and better technology." Zexthara's 4 arms moved slightly against his chains. That was before humans entered the galaxy. Morrison had been in the military for 20 years. He had fought pirates, rebels, and alien raiders. But he had never seen fear in the eyes of someone like this. The Krathari were known for never showing weakness. Yet something in those black eyes looked almost ... worried. "Help us understand," Morrison said. "Your people are warriors. You've conquered dozens of worlds. What makes humans different?" The alien was quiet for a long time. He looked around the small room, then back at the 2 humans. They seemed so small and weak compared to him. Morrison was maybe 6 feet tall with gray hair and lines on his face that showed his age. Carter was even smaller, a young woman who probably weighed less than one of his arms. "You want to know why coalition fleets run from humans?" Zexthara asked finally. "Yes," Morrison said. "You will not like the answer." Carter set down her datapad. "Try us." The alien warrior shifted in his chair. The chains around his arms made a soft clinking sound. "Very well. But first, tell me something. When your people fight a battle, they cannot win. What do? Morrison thought about the question. They fight anyway, even when defeat is certain? Especially then. Zexthara nodded slowly. That is what I thought you would say. And that, Admiral Morrison, is why every military commander in the Coalition has nightmares about fighting your species. Carter frowned. I don't understand. Fighting when you can't win is just foolish. The alien looked at her with something. That might have been pity. Is it? Let me tell you about the first time I encountered human forces. It was at a place called Kepler Station. Morrison knew about Kepler Station. Every human in the military did. It had been one of their worst defeats, but also one of their most famous battles. My fleet arrived with 40 ships, Zexthara continued. The humans had 4 ships and a small space station. Our computers said we would win in less than 2 hours with minimal losses. But you didn't. Carter said, "No, we did not." The alien's voice grew quieter. When we destroyed their shields and began boarding the station, I expected them to surrender. Instead, they did something I had never seen in 2 centuries of war. Morrison waited for him to continue. They kept fighting. Not just kept fighting. They fought harder. When their weapons ran out, they made new ones from pieces of their own station. When their soldiers were wounded, they dragged themselves to fight from wherever they fell. When their captain's ship was about to be destroyed, he flew it straight into our flagship on purpose. The alien paused and looked directly at Morrison. Your captain's last words were "Remember the Alamo." I had to research what that meant. Morrison felt a chill run down his back. He knew the story of the Alamo from Earth's history. A small group of soldiers who fought to the death against impossible odds. When I learned what those words meant, Zexthara said, I began to understand what we were truly fighting. Most species in the galaxy see war as a business decision. When the cost becomes too high, you make peace and try again later. But humans humans fight like every battle is personal. Carter was writing notes on her datapad. Personal how? The alien's black eyes focused on her. Like the universe itself has insulted you by suggesting you might lose. The room was quiet, except for the soft hum of the ship's engines. Morrison could feel his heart beating faster. He was starting to understand something important, something that explained why human forces had been winning battles they should have lost. There's more, Zexthara said, much more. But first, I want something from you. Morrison raised an eyebrow. You're hardly in a position to make demands. Am I not? The alien leaned forward as much as his chains would allow. I am the only Kratheri commander who has survived 3 battles with human forces. The information I have could change how. The Coalition fights this war. What is that worth to you? Morrison and Carter looked at each other. They both knew the alien was right. Intelligence from an enemy commander was incredibly valuable. What do you want? Morrison asked. Safe passage home when this is over. Full military honors. And the promise that what I tell you will be used to end this war, not make it worse. Morrison thought about it. The alien could be lying or trying to trick them, but something in his voice sounded honest. And if there was a chance to understand why human forces kept winning impossible battles, they had to take it. Agreed, Morrison said finally. Zexthara nodded once. Then let me tell you why your species terrifies armies. It starts with something you probably think is normal, but drives military planners across the galaxy to madness. What's that? Carter asked. The alien warrior looked at both humans with those dark eyes. When he spoke, his voice was soft, but carried weight like a threat. Your people fight like the universe owes you a personal debt. Admiral Morrison leaned back in his chair. The alien's words hung in the air like smoke. Lisa Carter stopped writing on her datapad and looked up at the massive creature across from them. A personal debt? Morrison asked. What do you mean by that? Zexthara's 4 arms shifted against his chains. His black eyes seemed to look through the humans rather than at them. Let me tell you about Kepler Station. The real story, not the sanitized version your military probably teaches. Carter glanced at Morrison. They both knew the official reports, but hearing it from an enemy commander would be different. My fleet approached the station on a Tuesday. Morning, the alien began. Standard tactical formation. We had studied human military doctrine for months. Your people follow predictable patterns when defending fixed positions. Shields up, weapons charged, fighters launched in defensive screens. Morrison nodded. That was basic military procedure. But when we arrived at Kepler Station, something was wrong. The humans had only half their fighters ready. Their weapon systems were operating at 60% power. Their shields were flickering. Zexthara made that grinding laugh sound again. My tactical officer said it would be like crushing insects. The alien paused and looked directly at Morrison. Do you know what your people were doing instead of preparing proper defenses? Tell us, Carter said. They were having a barbecue. Morrison blinked. A what? A barbecue, on the station's main deck. I could see the smoke from their cooking fires through our sensors. Captain Ben Taylor was grilling meat and drinking something from bottles. His crew was laughing and playing music. Carter frowned. That doesn't make sense. They knew you were coming? Of course they knew. We had been broadcasting our approach for 6 hours. Standard coalition protocol demands surrender warnings. Zexthara's voice grew quieter. But your Captain Taylor sent back a message that still gives me nightmares. The alien was silent for a moment, as if remembering something painful. What did he say? Morrison asked. He said, thanks for the heads up. We're having a going-away party. You're welcome to join us if you bring your own beer. Zexthara's mandibles clicked together. My officers thought it was a translation error. Morrison felt a chill. He was beginning to understand why this battle had become legendary among human forces. When we opened fire, the station's shields failed in minutes. We breached their hull in 12 places. Standard procedure called for them to surrender within the hour. The alien warrior's voice became harder. Instead, engineer Gani Rodriguez sealed himself inside the station's waste management system. Why? Carter asked. Because he had turned the sewage pipes into weapons. He rerouted the waste disposal pumps to create pressure cannons. For 3 hours, he fired garbage, metal scraps, and human waste at our boarding parties. Zexthara shook his head slowly. Do you understand what I am telling you? This human turned his own toilet into a weapon of war. Morrison had heard rumors about Rodriguez's improvised weapons, but never the full story. Meanwhile, your medic, Amy Walsh, was treating wounded soldiers in the middle of combat zones. She refused to evacuate to safe areas. When my soldiers cornered her in the medical bay, she threw surgical instruments at them with deadly accuracy. The alien's black eyes focused on Carter. She killed 2 of my warriors with a scalpel and a bone saw. Carter swallowed hard. She was just a medic. Just a medic who fought like a demon when protecting her patients. Zexthara's 4 arms tensed against his chains. But that was not the worst part. Morrison waited. He could sense something darker coming. The worst part was Captain Taylor himself. When his ship was boarded and his engines were failing, he could have surrendered. His crew was dead or dying. His weapons were gone. Any rational being would have tried to save the lives that remained. The alien paused again, and when he continued, his voice was almost a whisper. Instead, Captain Taylor locked himself on the bridge and sent one final message to my flagship. He said, "Tell my wife I remembered the Alamo. Tell my kids their daddy." Went down swinging. Morrison felt his chest tighten. He knew what was coming next. Then he aimed his dying ship directly at our engine core and pushed the throttle to maximum. The explosion destroyed his ship completely and crippled 3 of mine. Zexthara looked at both humans. He turned his own death into a weapon. The interrogation room was quiet, except for the soft hum of air recycling systems. Carter had stopped, taking notes. Morrison stared at the table, processing what he had heard. Most species fight to win, the alien continued. When winning becomes impossible, they fight to survive. When survival becomes impossible, they surrender to fight another. This is logical. This is how civilized beings conduct war. Morrison looked up. But humans don't do that. No, humans fight to win. When winning becomes impossible, they fight to hurt you as much as possible before they die. When that becomes impossible, they fight to make sure their deaths mean something. Zexthara's voice carried a note of respect mixed with fear. Your Captain Taylor did not die in battle. He died making a statement. Carter found her voice. What kind of statement? That humans would rather be legends than survivors. Morrison stood up and walked to the small window that showed space outside. Stars twinkled in the darkness like distant fires. You're saying, we fight differently because we think differently about losing? You fight differently because you think differently about everything. The alien's chains clinked as he shifted position. After Kepler Station, I studied human military history. I read about your ancient battles, your wars on Earth, your first conflicts in space. Morrison turned back to face him. And every other species in the galaxy has a word that means acceptable defeat, a way to lose with honor while preserving your people for the future. Humans have no such word. Carter frowned. That's not true. We have words for defeat. You have words for temporary setbacks. Zexthara's black eyes seemed to burn with intensity. I studied your language for months. When humans say they have lost a battle, they immediately start planning how to win the next one. When other species lose, they accept it and move on. Morrison sat back down. The alien was right, and it disturbed him. Humans did take losses personally, in a way that seemed strange to other species. After Kepler Station, word spread through. The coalition fleets. The Crothery had encountered a species that fought like madmen. But it was worse than madness. Zexthara leaned forward as much as his chains allowed. Madmen are unpredictable, but ultimately defeatable. You humans are something else entirely. What are we? Morrison asked. The alien warrior was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone who had seen too much war. You are a species that has convinced itself that losing is not a possibility. Not because you always win, but because you refuse to accept that any defeat is final. Zexthara's mandibles clicked together slowly. Do you know what my people call human soldiers now? Carter shook her head. The undying rage. Because even when you are beaten, even when you are destroyed, somehow the fight continues. Morrison felt something cold settle in his stomach. There's more to this story, isn't there? Zexthara nodded once. Much more. And each part will disturb you more than the last. The silence in the interrogation room stretched on for several minutes. Admiral Morrison and Lisa Carter both stared at the alien warrior, trying to process what they had heard. Zexthara sat motionless, his forearms held by heavy chains, but his black eyes showed something that looked almost like sadness. You said there was more, Morrison finally said. Something worse than Kepler Station. Yes. Zexthara's voice was barely above a whisper. The siege of Titan Base. Carter looked up from her datapad. She had been quiet since hearing about Captain Taylor's final moments. I've read about Titan Base. It was surrounded for 3 months. 3 months and 4 days, the alien corrected. I was there. I commanded the Eastern Assault Force. He paused and seemed to gather his thoughts. 12 different coalition species participated in that siege. We had 300 ships and over 50,000 soldiers. The humans had one small base with maybe 800 defenders. Morrison knew the basic facts about Titan Base, but hearing it from an enemy commander would give him a different perspective. What made that battle different? Everything. Zexthara shifted in his chair, and his chains made soft clinking sounds. When we surrounded the base, we expected them to ask for terms within a week. The base had no chance of resupply or reinforcement. They were completely cut off. The alien warrior looked out the small window at the stars beyond. Instead of surrendering, they sent us a message. Lieutenant Colonel Steve Parker, the base commander, thanked us for surrounding them. He said it would make their job easier. Carter frowned. Their job? Killing all of us. Morrison felt that familiar chill again. Human military commanders were known for bold statements, but that seemed extreme even for them. We thought it was just human bravado at first, Zexthara continued. Empty threats to boost morale. Then the night raids began. The alien's voice became harder as he remembered. Parker divided his small force into teams of 5 or 6 soldiers each. They would sneak out of the base after dark and attack our supply lines, communication stations, and command posts. Morrison nodded. Basic guerrilla tactics. Harassment to slow down your operations. No, Admiral. This was something else entirely. Zexthara's black eyes focused on Morrison with uncomfortable intensity. These raids were not meant to slow us down. They were meant to teach us fear. Carter stopped writing on her datapad. Teach you fear? Each raid was specifically designed to target the psychological weaknesses of different species in our coalition. The alien warrior's voice grew quieter. Your Dr. Helen Martinez had studied every species in our force. She knew exactly how to make each one afraid. Morrison had heard of Martinez. She was a xenobiologist who specialized in alien psychology. What did she do? Against the Zephyrians, who fear the dark, Parker's teams would attack at night and leave behind recordings of human children singing lullabies. The recordings would play on loop in the darkness. Zexthara's mandibles clicked together nervously. It sounds harmless, but to the Zephyrians, it was psychological torture. Carter looked confused. Children's songs? Children's songs in the dark, played where their friends had just been killed. The Zephyrians began to believe human children were supernatural creatures who hunted in the night. The alien paused. Within 2 weeks, half the Zephyrian force requested transfer to other sectors. Morrison was beginning to understand. The humans had turned their scientific knowledge into a weapon more effective than bombs or bullets. Against the Valhari, who value personal honor above all else, Parker would challenge their champions to single combat, but he cheated. Zexthara's voice carried a note of reluctant admiration. He would study their fighting styles for weeks, then exploit their weaknesses. When he defeated them, he would broadcast the fights across all coalition frequencies. Humiliation warfare, Morrison said. Exactly. The Valhari could not comprehend how humans could fight without honor and still win. It broke their understanding of combat. The alien shifted his massive frame. The Valhari commander challenged Parker to single combat himself. Parker accepted, then brought a sniper. Carter blinked. A sniper? To a single combat challenge? The Valhari expected a fair fight. Parker brought Sergeant Rick Adams with a long-range rifle. Adams shot the Valhari commander from half a mile away while Parker distracted him with conversation. Zexthara made that grinding laugh sound. Then Parker broadcast a message saying that honor was for people who could afford to lose. Morrison found himself both disturbed and impressed by the tactical innovation. What happened to the other species? Each one received special treatment designed by Dr. Martinez. She had compiled psychological profiles of every coalition species and found their deepest fears. The alien's forearms tensed against his chains. For the Korthek, who worshipped their ancestors, She had human soldiers dress like ghosts and whisper the names of dead Korthic warriors during night attacks. Was writing furiously on her datapad now. That's psychological warfare on a level I've never heard of. Because most species fight armies, not minds. Zexthara looked at both humans. But your people weaponized knowledge itself. Every piece of information became a tool to break enemy morale. Morrison leaned forward. But surely a few psychological. Tricks couldn't defeat a force that size. You would think so. The alien warrior's voice became even quieter. But then Sergeant Adams led his suicide mission. The room fell silent. Morrison could hear his own heartbeat. Adams and 5 other humans captured one of our command ships. A fully armed coalition destroyer with over 200 crew members. Zexthara paused, as if the memory was painful. We expected them to destroy or use it to escape. They didn't, Carter said. It was not a question. No, they kept the crew alive and used our own communication systems to broadcast messages to every coalition home world. The aliens' black eyes seemed to burn with remembered fear. Personal messages from captured officers to their families. Morrison felt his blood turn cold. They turned prisoners into propaganda tools. Worse than that, they had the prisoners explain in detail how humans had outsmarted each coalition species. Every tactical weakness, every psychological manipulation, every failure of coalition leadership. Zexthara's voice was barely audible now. They made our own people tell their families how superior human tactics were. Carter set down her datapad with shaking hands. That's brilliant and horrible at the same time. The broadcasts lasted for 3 days. Every coalition homeworld heard their own military leaders explain how humans had broken there. Forces using nothing but intelligence and psychological warfare. The alien warrior looked directly at Morrison. Do you understand what that did to coalition morale? Morrison did understand, and it terrified him. It made every coalition species question whether they could ever defeat humans. Exactly. Within a week, 3 species withdrew from the siege completely. 2 others demanded separate peace negotiations with Earth. Zexthara's chains clinked as he moved. The remaining forces were paralyzed by paranoia. Every species suspected the others of planning betrayal. The alien was quiet for a long moment before continuing. But the worst part was yet to come. On the final day of the siege, when only my Kratheri forces remained, Parker sent me a personal message. What did he say? Carter asked. Zexthara looked at both humans with something that might have been respect, mixed with fear. He thanked me for the valuable training exercise. Then he said that everything they had learned about coalition tactics and psychology would be shared with every human military unit in the galaxy. Morrison felt his mouth go dry. They turned the siege into a research project. A research project. That cost us an entire coalition army and gave humans detailed intelligence about 12 different species' military weaknesses. The alien warrior's voice carried a note of bitter admiration. Your people did not just win the siege of Titan. Base, they turned their own defeat into a weapon for future victories. Carter was staring at her datapad, but Morrison could tell she was not really seeing it. How do you fight an enemy like that? Zexthara looked at her with those dark eyes that had seen too much war. That, young human, is exactly the question that keeps coalition military commanders awake at night. Admiral Morrison rubbed his temples. The stories Zexthara had told were disturbing, but they still felt like ordinary military tactics taken to extremes. There had to be something more, something that explained the deep fear he had seen in coalition. Forces. You've told us about clever tactics and psychological warfare, Morrison said. But that's not enough to make entire fleets retreat. What's the real reason coalition armies fear humans? Zexthara was quiet for a long time. His forearms moved slightly against the chains, and his black eyes seemed to look through the walls of the interrogation room. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, softer, almost sad. The real reason is not what humans do in battle. It is what humans believe about battle itself. Lisa Carter looked up from her datapad. What do you mean? Let me tell you about the Battle of Wolf 359, the last battle I ever commanded against your species. The alien warrior's mandibles clicked together slowly. It was supposed to be a simple operation. We had intelligence that a small human fleet was transporting civilians to a new colony world. Morrison knew about Wolf 359. It had been a massacre. Nearly every human ship had been destroyed. We intercepted the convoy in deep space. 15 coalition ships against 5 human vessels. The humans were protecting transport ships full of families and children. Zexthara paused. Any other species would have surrendered immediately to save the civilians. Carter was writing again, but her hands were shaking slightly. But the humans didn't surrender. No. Admiral Kate Sullivan, the human commander, did something that still haunts my dreams. The alien's voice became barely audible. She ordered her warships to form a defensive line between my fleet and the civilian transports. Then she sent a message to every human colony within 50 light years. Morrison felt his chest tighten. He knew what was coming. The message contained detailed scans of every coalition ship in my fleet, technical specifications, weapon configurations, shield frequencies, crew numbers. Zexthara looked directly at Morrison. She gave away every tactical advantage we had, broadcast to dozens of human worlds. Carter frowned. But that would help future human forces, not save her fleet. Exactly. The alien warrior's black eyes seemed to burn with remembered horror. Admiral Sullivan was not fighting to win that battle. She was fighting to make sure future human forces would win their battles. Morrison stood up and walked to the small window. Outside, stars twinkled in the endless darkness of space. She sacrificed her fleet to gather intelligence. Worse than that, she sacrificed her fleet to turn her own death into a weapon. Zexthara's chains clinked as he leaned forward. As my ships destroyed her vessels one by one, she kept broadcasting. Ship designs, battle tactics, commander profiles, everything. Her sensors could gather. The alien paused, and when he continued, his voice carried a note of respect that bordered on fear. Admiral Sullivan's last transmission was not a cry for help or a message to her family. She was dictating instructions for building better anti-coalition weapons. Zexthara shook his massive head. Her dying words were technical specifications for improved human missile guidance systems. Carter had stopped taking notes. Her data pad sat forgotten on the table. She turned her own death into a research project. That is when I began to understand what humans truly are. The alien warrior looked at both humans with those dark eyes that had seen too much war. Most species fight to preserve their civilization. Humans fight as if they are auditioning for their civilization's legends. Morrison turned back from the window. Auditioning? Every human soldier I have ever encountered believes that their individual actions will be remembered and honored for generations. Zexthara's forearms tensed against his chains. They do not fight just to win. They fight to become stories worth telling. The interrogation room was silent, except for the soft hum of the ship's life support systems. Morrison could feel something cold settling in his stomach as he began to understand. "You're saying humans don't fight battles," Morrison said slowly. "We fight for legends." "Yes, and legends never surrender." The alien warrior's voice was barely a whisper now. "Do you know what happened after Wolf 359? Carter shook her head. Within 6 months, human forces had used Admiral Sullivan's intelligence to destroy twice as many coalition ships as we had destroyed at Wolf 359. Zexthara made that grinding laugh sound, but there was no humor in it. She had termed her defeat into a victory that lasted for years. Morrison sat back down, his mind racing. Is that when coalition forces started retreating from human engagements? No, that was when coalition military psychologists realized what we were truly fighting. The alien looked at both humans with something that might have been pity. We were not fighting an army or a navy, or even a species. We were fighting a mythology. Carter found her voice. A mythology? Every human who dies in battle becomes a story. Every story becomes an inspiration for other humans to fight harder. Zexthara's black eyes seemed to look through them. You do not have soldiers. You have potential legends who happen to carry weapons. Morrison felt his blood turn cold. The alien was right, and it disturbed him more than he wanted to admit. But I learned the final truth about humans during my last personal combat. The alien warrior's voice became even quieter. It was not in a great battle or famous siege. It was a small skirmish near the edge of human space. Morrison waited for him to continue. My ship had cornered a single human transport carrying civilian refugees. Standard protocol called for demanding surrender and processing the civilians as prisoners. Zexthara paused, as if the memory was painful. The transport captain was a woman named Maria Santos, a civilian pilot with no military training. Carter leaned forward. What did she do? She challenged me to single combat. The alien's mandibles clicked together slowly. If she won, civilians would go free. If she lost, they would surrender peacefully. Morrison blinked. A civilian pilot challenged a Krathari warrior commander? The odds were absurd. I had never lost individual combat in over a century of warfare. She was a small human woman with improvised weapons. Zexthara's 4 arms moved against his chains. I accepted the challenge to demonstrate coalition superiority. The alien was quiet for a long moment. She fought with pieces of metal torn from her ship's hull. She used emergency oxygen tanks as weapons. She moved with desperate creativity that I had never encountered. Zexthara's voice carried grudging respect. She lost, of course, but not before wounding me more severely than any opponent in my career. Carter was staring at the alien warrior. What did she say when she was dying? Zexthara looked directly at her. She smiled and said, "My daughter's going to hear about this someday." The interrogation room fell completely silent. Morrison could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. That is when I understood the final truth about humans. The alien warrior's voice was barely audible. You do not fight battles. You fight for stories worth telling your children. Morrison felt something profound settle in his mind. And stories like that make other humans fight harder. Exactly. Every human death becomes inspiration for 10 more humans to fight with impossible courage. Zexthara looked at both humans with those dark eyes. How do you defeat an enemy where every loss makes them stronger? Carter set down her data pad completely. You can't. That is why coalition fleets retreat when they encounter human forces. The alien warrior leaned back in his chair. Not because we cannot defeat you in battle, but because defeating you only makes more of you. Morrison understood now. It was not human technology or tactics that terrified alien armies. It was human psychology itself. So why are you telling us this? Morrison asked the final question. Zexthara looked at both humans for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. Because your species terrifies armies not through strength, but through the absolute certainty that you will make any victory against you cost more than it is worth. The alien warrior's black eyes seemed to burn with remembered fear. The coalition is not retreating because we cannot defeat you. We are retreating because we are afraid of what defeating you might turn us into. Morrison felt a chill run down his spine. What do you mean? To truly defeat humans, we would have to become like humans. We would have to fight not just to win, but to destroy the very idea of human resistance. Zexthara's voice was barely a whisper. We would have to become monsters. The alien warrior looked out the small window at the stars beyond. And perhaps that is the most terrifying thing about your species. You fight so fiercely for your stories and legends that defeating you requires abandoning everything that makes us civilized. Morrison and Carter sat in stunned silence as the full implications of Zexthara's words settled over them. They had learned something profound about their own species, something that explained why the galaxy's greatest warriors chose retreat over victory when facing humanity. Outside the interrogation room, the stars continued their eternal dance, silent witnesses to the fear that had spread across the galaxy. The fear of a species that refused to accept that any fight was truly hopeless, because every defeat could become a legend, and every legend could inspire 1,000 victories.